Good morning, good afternoon, good evening, happy Monday, wherever you may be tuning in from. This is episode 37. That's 5 and a bandaged 2. 37 of Industry Insights. Jason, we're going to be continuing on our research discussion. This has been 2021, the year of our research. January was all about our upcoming Data Protection 2021 report. February is all about our cloud-specific research. But today, Jason, specifically as it relates to cloud, we're going to focus on if you back up to the cloud, who's doing that and how are they doing that? Isn't that right?
Yeah, absolutely. So we've done the data protection trends report for the last couple of years, and it covers a large swag of different scenarios and considerations and drivers. And one of the ones we saw for the last couple of years was how important cloud as part of a data protection strategy or cloud for production and how that affects the data protection strategy would go. So how about can we look at the first slide and kind of set some context for this? This actually comes out of the data protection trends research. And the first slide is about cloud backup. And Dave, I know when I saw this, my first thought was this is like nearly a research's perfect chart because it says such a clean story. I think Dave froze up again. All right, no worries. Yeah, so Dave is enjoying the cold winter that comes with winter, and therefore has intermittent internet connection. I live in Texas, so I don't have snow near as often. Let me tell you what we're talking about here. So in the cloud backup piece, in 2020, we asked organizations, what is your primary mechanisms for backup? And 40%, if you look on the left-hand side, 40% said we are self-managed in our backup solution and we're using all on-premise tools. And then we asked them, what is it going to be in 2 years? And that went from 40 down to 22%. You have to skip over 2 bars. And then we'll explain the other 2 sets of categories in a second. So we asked about 20, and then 2 years out for 22. This year in the 2021 research, same idea. We asked about 21 and what they're going to do in 23. And so now you get these 4 nice bars that are in a line. What I think is super interesting for the folks at home is if you look on that left-hand side of the data, self-managed backups using only on-premise tools goes in a nice clean line. It was 40% down to 34, down to 22, down to 19. They are deprecating an on-premise only approach to data protection. But there's not just one way to leverage the cloud as part of a data protection strategy. So what we see in the middle is a slight but gradual incline of those folks that are using self-managed tools, but leveraging the cloud as part of that. So think object storage in Amazon S3, Azure Blob, IBM Cloud, et cetera. Or probably even more exciting is look on the bars on the right. So on the right, that's no longer a completely self-managed data protection solution. This is about cloud-based backup managed by a backup as a service provider. And you see that going from 29 to 33% to 44% to 46%. What I want you to take away from that, though, is certainly the cloud will be a growing percent of the likelihood of your organizations. At the same time, there's not just one way to do it. So whether you're self-managed or fully embracing backup as a service, DR as a service, it's a very exciting time in the transformation of backup. And I see nodding, which means my partner in crime has beat the internet and is back online. Dave, you with us, my friend?
Yeah, I think that I am, and you nailed it. We've got a little bit of intermittent activity here due to Denver snow and then melt. The melt seems to be worse than the snow. But yeah, I like directionally how clean this looks. And of course, any individual organization, it may not look quite so perfect. But when you aggregate that on a global basis, the trends are pretty clear. And I think we truncated the end, but it's like an end of 1,800 and something. So it is definitely statistically valid. And speaking of sort of locations, let's give a shout out to our global map. Wherever you're tuning in from, feel free to chime in the comment section. Several already have. Looks like we've got, certainly always love Canada, don't we, Jason? That takes up some good real estate.
There you go.
We've got Mexico. You're in Texas. I'm Colorado. Our producers in Georgia. We've got, I believe that's Kentucky, or is that Virginia? I am so geographically challenged.
Pretty sure that's Virginia, but I just love that Texas and our neighbors to the south are all zoned in on data protection, as well as the Great White North. So, way to be up on backup, y'all.
Definitely.
We are in Europe.
We've got France, UK. Wow. Got Czech Republic, Germany, Turkey, it looks like. I know, let's see, India, Qatar, Egypt. Wow, a lot going on. Appreciate that. If you do have any questions or comments about this research or other things, drop those in as well, too. We'd love to get to that. And we'll just check back on the map in a little bit. Now, Jason, with that as a foundation, meaning what we just went through, let's double click now on our cloud specific research. If this is what sort of directionally looks to be happening, and probably none of this specific data looks as a surprise. When we look at infrastructure as a service, however, I think that now the finer point of who is actually doing this is interesting. So maybe parse through the left-hand side, who is actually determining the data protection strategy and requirements.
Yeah, I was actually happy to see this. So one of the things about this secondary piece of research that we looked at was we actually surveyed different kinds of respondents. So people that self-identified as I run cloud-hosted infrastructure, those are the IaaS respondents in the bright yellowy green. And then those folks who do backup are in the darker green. Right. And so we wanted to kind of get some different opinions on who do you think, whose job is it? Right. Because so often, even the data center, go back, 10 years, the DBAs thought the storage admins were backing up, and the backup admins thought that the DBAs were backing up. And guess what? Nothing was getting backed up. Right. And so the idea of do the two audiences agree actually was a pretty big deal. And in fact, sure enough, they do. What you're actually looking at on the left-hand side is who's determining the requirements, the strategy for data protection. And I really like that it's not the data protection team. If you look on that left-hand side, it's not the backup admins. They're defining the strategy about a third of the time. They are, interestingly enough, on the right-hand side, they're the ones doing the backups. But really, I love the fact that IaaS backup strategy is being defined by the same people that are defining the overall central IT strategy, which means that you have a holistic approach for the servers that are on and off-prem as far as how they should be backed up. And I think that's super important because the workload that was on-prem last month could be cloud-hosted next month. It'd sure be nice if the same team was determining the data protection requirements for both.
Yeah, and I think the surprising, in a positive way, result of this is that cloud is not as isolated as we might have otherwise feared, right. Meaning we're making good progress in terms of adoption, but we're also making good progress in terms of organizational alignment, not treating cloud as just something that's a bit off to the side or orthogonal. I do want to address a question that Naz asked. This question is, migrating data to the cloud is slow and challenging from legacy systems. How does Veeam speed up this process? Well, I'll give my shot at this, Jason, and then you jump in as well with your thoughts. So you're right, bulk data movement is challenging. And I always like to joke, Jason, but it's true that there's Snowball, which is the smart encased data transfer. Think of it as a very fancy USB drive with a lot more security and tracking. But there's also Snowmobile, which I'm not making this up, is an Amazon Web Services semi-truck. And the fact that it's easier to transfer data by putting a semi-truck's worth of petabytes of information, sending it on the highway and driving across the country, tells you everything you need to know about bulk scale ingress and egress. However, that being said, those are sort of the laws of physics challenges. There are certain things that can be done, which is preceding. That can be tape. That can be things like Snowball. It could be obviously Snowmobile, at scale, you can think of that as. But one of the things I'll point to, Jason, is Veeam's unique capability around data portability and cloud mobility, meaning writing data in a self-describing format that is independent of its location such that we can move or repopulate that data somewhere else without having to transform or go through a lot of, I'll call it extract, transform, and load ETL kind of magician tricks. But see if you have any other thoughts as well.
No, I think you're spot on, right? So when you think about migration, the two things you have to think about is the actual bulk data transfer, and then how do you replumb after it's over there? And that is not a new problem, right? So even before the cloud, we were doing that going from old metal to new metal. We were doing that from physical servers to virtual servers. That idea of first you move it over and then you have to replumb it afterwards, that's a big deal on migrations. And over 31 years in IT, I don't want to think about how many not only weekends but holiday weekends I have given up over the years for those heavy lifting migrations. And the first thing you do on a migration is you back it up. Second thing you ought to do is make sure you can restore it, right? And then you do the bulk data transfer, and then you do the replumb, and you got to get that done in time. So if anything goes bad, you can replumb backwards and be ready again for Sunday night for the customers to go forward. I would tell you that based on how Veeam does this, you can back up that production workload on a Tuesday, and instead of waiting for the weekend, go ahead and restore a version of that up into your favorite hyperscale cloud during the day on Wednesday. Kick the tires on it, play with it, figure out all the pieces and parts. If it all looks good, Thursday morning, you could just resync the storage and you're done. If it doesn't look good, doctor, do not hurt thy patient. Right? You haven't moved anything yet. So there's a huge amount of benefit from testing and actually using the restore mechanisms for most people think about for DR as a migration mechanism, really efficient way to get that done. So thank you for the question.
Yeah, and I always like your phrase related to that, Jason, which is migration is the disaster recovery scenario that you plan for, because it is that bulk oriented, and it also can include a lot of systems. So that surrounding connective tissue that you have to worry about in a real DR scenario comes into play. Okay,
Amen.
so we're going to update the map. And before we do, though, let's maybe just click into the next slide. This one digs in specifically on backing up specific cloud platforms. I think what is interesting here is looking at the duration. So on the left, how long on average backup data is hosted on these cloud targets? Less than 1 year, 64% for infrastructure as a service. Less than 1 year, 58% for generalized backup. You can see the distribution here, Jason, but the bell curve, right? You always look for where the spikes are. And generally, we're seeing a real pop between the 6 months and then the 1 and 6 months, that is, and then the next half of year, 7 to 12 months. Not horribly surprising there, but it's interesting that the IaaS admins and the backup admins, where they differ the most is also in that same range, meaning the 1 to 6 months and then the 7 to 12 months.
Yeah, this chart, the pair of these charts actually really concerns me quite a bit. And so for the folks at home, as you unpack this, might take a screenshot of this one. So as Dave mentioned, we got two different personas: IaaS admins in the brighter green, the darker green backup admins. And for the most part, they agree on the shape of the data. Some of them disagree a little bit, give or take, with how long they're within that 6 months to 12-month range. Here's the thing I think I worry about, though. Forget where the workload lives, whether it's on-prem or cloud-based. Think about the data and the retention requirements of that data. If that workload was running on-prem and you would have had a mandate for 5 years of retention or 10 years of retention or whatever, the fact that you chose to stop using your own metal and to use, cloud-hosted metal does not absolve you of those retention requirements, right? And so it worries me, the vast percentage of organizations that say they're only holding cloud-hosted data for less than a year, because that's not the same distribution you would expect for long-term retention for any kind of regulatory or compliance mandate. So that worries me, part one. The thing that also worries me on the right-hand side is when you have that secondary copy and you're holding it for more than a year. So if you scored more than a year on the left, you got to answer the question on the right. And on that, they said, okay, where are you storing that data? About half of organizations are holding it within the same provider that their primary data is. And the problem with that is if you have a subscription error, right? You've lost not only access to the production data. This could be an accidental error. This could be an attack and someone taking your credentials. You've also lost access to the backup copies of that data. So I really like the kids on the right who said that they're taking that storage to either another cloud Amazon versus Azure, et cetera. Those folks that are bringing the data back home, right? You can scale that, you can buffer that down. And so now I've got at least one copy of data I can put my hands on. And again, God bless tape, even in a cloudy world, right? 1 in 6 organizations still say that tape is part of their strategy. And if you have a long-term retention mandate, it ought to be, right? So that's the things that you should think about is, are you holding it long enough? And are you holding it in such a way that you could get to it if you had to? That's what people need to be thinking about as they're thinking about the cloud hosted workloads you can't otherwise touch.
Yeah, and if we combine kind of a past data point, Jason, and I believe it might have been, perhaps it was early this month, otherwise it was the end of January, but we made the comment that production mission critical workloads are moving to the cloud.
Yeah.
Right. This isn't research data. This isn't a secondary copy. So to your point about it's concerning if you're putting all of your eggs in one basket, which is essentially that 50 and 50 bar there over on the left-hand side of the right data points. So if you're putting everything in that same repository, meaning the same cloud provider, that's worrisome. And we want to make sure people go and do best practices, because no matter what, no matter how you deploy, even if you quote unquote vend out some of this, you're still custodian of the data. You're still responsible for it. So maybe now we can bring up the world map. I'm told we've got some countries we've added, probably about a dozen or so. If I go kind of around in Central America, we have Panama. Looks like in Europe, we've got Sweden, Netherlands, Ireland, Portugal, Libya, Greece, Romania, Poland, Senegal. Very interesting. Thank you very much for that. Yeah, some areas of the map we don't always see, Jason, or don't always see every week. So thank you very much for that. If I'm kind of back of the envelope counting, I think we're approaching 36 countries now, a good 2.5 dozen countries.
Oh, that's fantastic.
And I see we got a question from Pradeep who says almost all of the new age backup vendors are backing up to cloud storage. How does Veeam stand out among others? So I'll do the same kind of thing. I'll throw out a couple thoughts and you feel free to chime in as well, Jason. You know what? I'll pick a couple of differentiation points as I see it. One is I think there's some uniqueness in Veeam in that our cloud products are designed to both be standalone. So if you are the Microsoft 365 admin, you can consume our Veeam backup for Office 365. And regardless of whatever you might be deploying anywhere else, meaning any other cloud or on-prem, what have you. However, much like that rest of our cloud products, which now include AWS, Azure, and Google Cloud Platform, that plugs into our overall portfolio. I mean, you can bring data back. You can manage that centrally from an on-premises Veeam backup and replication instance. So putting a finer point on it, these things can be isolated and operate standalone, or they can integrate with the greater whole. The other thing that I'd point out, though, Jason, is some of the other providers out there charge you for the capability of sending data to or moving data around the cloud over and above what the subscription might be for, say, your Google Cloud Platform. Yep. So they're charging you just for the privilege of having a hyperscaler also charge you in essence.
Yeah, I was certainly going to pick on the charging one, right? So why would you pay a tax on top of the consumption you're already going to pay in networking and in storage consumption? You have to pay for the permission to have the data leave your building. I just think that's a flawed argument. Let me get nerdy, though, because one of my favorite things about why I like the Veeam cloud story compared to so many others, a lot of the architectures for how they leverage cloud actually treat it as if it's a second tier within the storage layer. So the same way that you might have a disk that has like a flash tier and then a hard disk tier, they just treat storage or cloud as a third tier. The problem with those architectures is if you lose the primary array, right? If you lose the primary storage, then you've lost not only the flash tier and the disk tier, you've lost the index to the cloud tier, right? One of the things I love best about the Veeam architecture is the fact that the metadata that we use actually is mirrored in both the on-prem repository and in the cloud tier. So if you lost an entire production environment, including the backup server, the data in the cloud is self-describing. You can spin up a brand new virgin copy of Veeam Backup on a cloud host, in fact, mount to that S3 bucket or that Azure Blob Store, and then immediately start doing restores. You don't have to, you're not dependent on where those caches go. And I think that's a huge technical difference, especially when you start thinking about disaster recovery scenarios.
Yeah, great point. Let's combine a couple of those, meaning the economic side as well as that self-descriptive resiliency. To your point, you could even go download the free, no-charge Veeam Community Edition, which covers dozens of machines in perpetuity for no charge. You can, as long as you know your license keys, you do have to know the password, you need to know the credentials, but if you can get to the bucket in the cloud, you can take the no-cost version of the product with no stand-up, no database restored, and because it's self-described in a resilient manner, which you described, stream it right back without having to do anything else, without having to even engage with services if you didn't choose to.
Exactly.
Awesome. Well, let's take a look at one of our last data points before we tease up some of the future activities happening, and that is around how cloud workloads are being protected. So interesting pair of bars here, Jason. The data is lining up very evenly, roughly speaking, only literally 1 percentage point between the IaaS admins and the backup admins. Did that surprise you at all?
It surprises me a little whenever any two groups in IT agree this well. And this is at scale, right? So there's 945 IaaS admins, 332 backup admins. We could either take either set of data and we'd call them statistically valid. But the fact that these two groups are actually communicating with each other and in concert, and they agree, I'm actually super delighted by. Let me tell you what I'm not delighted by. So you can choose more than one of these workloads, obviously. For the 50% of organizations that said they're using the built-in snaps, that's okay. But that's not going to be a long-term retention model, right? So it's going to be great for recovery for the last couple of days. And in fact, most of the backup solutions leverage those snaps as the source of what we do in Veeam. Mm-hmm. What I don't care for is the middle bars. The 2/3 of organizations that said they're leveraging agents within each VM, or cloud-hosted VM in this case. If you're doing that because you're trying to do selectability of data, if you need a better VSS writer, I mean, there's a few scenarios where you want to do that. But when I see that chart, it makes me think about 12, 13 years ago when virtualization was first coming out, and all the legacy backup solutions said, just put an agent inside of each VM, it'll be fine. It was not fine. Right? Machines are not made to be backed up in that way because it punishes the CPU, it punishes the IO channel. There is a better way to back up VMs. That's when Veeam came into the picture, and we back up from the outside of that workload instead of trying to pull the data out from the inside. And so I worry about those middle bars in that I think a lot of those come from legacy backup solutions that they don't know there's a better way or they're not capable of it. So I like that the third-party tools approach where you're saying native image-based from the outside as opposed to just relying on agents on the inside. So I worry for that middle bar a little bit. I think you're going to see that continue to go down, much like it did in virtualization 12 years ago.
Yeah, I think we do have a history repeating itself, right? Learned lessons oftentimes do repeat themselves. And partially it's because best practices remain best practices regardless of where the workload resides.
Sure. And again, I mean, if you don't have another option than agents, because you're a legacy architecture, you're going to tell people to use agents. That's what you got, right? Please, folks at home, there is a better way.
And in fairness, I will make I don't know if it's a pro-agent statement, but there is a time and a place for agents, to be sure.
There is, as I said. So, let's say you've got a core workload that's you got 8 databases running within a VM, right? So you might say, okay, I only want 2 of those databases protected. Then you don't want to do an image-based backup. You put a SQL level agent inside there and protect just those 2 databases or just that file directory set. So certainly for selectability of data, as well as leveraging things like VSS writers and automation to shut down a workload or bring it back, there are scenarios for it. I just don't want you depending on it for all the rest of the workloads that are there.
Yep, fair point. So as we start to wind up, let's look ahead a little bit. Mm-hmm. This Friday, our colleagues Rick Vanover and Corinne Bessette are going to go
They're doing. Oh yeah. So they're going to do data labs, which is easily one of the most undervalued, underappreciated, truly cool features in the Veeam technology portfolio. As a brief teaser, and I'm not going to do it near as good a justice as Rick or Corinne. The way that we ensure that you can actually recover your data and get more value out of that data is we don't just look at the backup log and say, yeah, no errors, must be good. No. We actually do test restores. We create a sandbox environment, throw those restores actually into that sandbox in real time after each evening, and check, can you do an ODBC call? Can you do a MAPI call? Does you have a file exist? Can you do an LDAP query? Check the validity of that. And what customers years ago said was, hey, could you not scrap that little test bed in the morning? Because I'd like to do things like reports, analytics, data mining, proactive test mitigation on new patches, et cetera. And so we productize that and call it data labs. Truly one of the more transforming, proactive things that you can do to unlock massive additional value out of your backup solution. And there's no better people in the company to tell you about that than Veeam and than Rick and Corinne. So that's Friday. Dave, are you back? You want to pitch Monday to us?
Yeah, so we'll see if I'm back. But the Monday, we're going to continue on the rest of our cloud activity. And Monday's going to focus on disaster recovery in the cloud specifically as we kind of unpack more of this recent research. So we've got Corinne and Rick on Data Labs Friday. You and I will take Cloud DR Monday. We should give a shout out to version 11 that's coming as well. Version 11 of our flagship product. We're having a launch event Wednesday, February 24th. That's 11 Eastern. I sprinkled in just 6 of some of the or I guess it's a half a dozen, 5-ish of the more impactful items. But Jason, there's over 150 different enhancements. We joked about tape. We've got a lot of native tape enhancements in addition to extending the capability that you just spoke of, meaning data labs and the ability to do instant recovery. We're extending that even further. More cloud capabilities, more cyber protection, continuous data protection, and pretty related to what we're talking about here, backup as a service, disaster recovery as a service enhancements.
Yeah, I'm looking forward to next week. You know, the fun part is that only after you've solved backup, right, can you start to do the things that are really much more interesting and important for the business. So operational recovery, got that done. Always reliable, always flexible, always simple. But then after that, you know, there's this thing called the cloud, and it's elastic, so you can use it when you need it and turn it off when you don't, which kind of sounds like a fantastic disaster recovery location, doesn't it? And so we're going to explore what folks said they're doing with that for 2021. Hey, before you close this out, Dave, I do want to make a quick pitch. This is our 4th year that Veeam is also doing what we call the Veeam Innovation Awards, VIAs. Every year we celebrate partner-powered solutions. We celebrate customers that are achieving great outcomes, really looking at those organizations that have taken those Veeam technologies and just gotten great outcomes out of those. Nominations for the VIA 2021 awardees, nominations are open now. They're going to run through March 15th, so you got about 5 more weeks left. These are open to customers. If you are a partner or a alliance or whatever, nominate your favorite customers along the way, and you'll get some of the benefits from that as well. But we'd love to hear those stories. And you can go to the Veeam blog or just search for, Veeam Innovation Award, and you'll find the 2021 nomination form. So tell us about your great stories and give us a chance to celebrate you.
Yeah, great points. It's all about an ecosystem, right? There's some people out there doing some truly cool stuff.
Yeah.
And we'd love to be able to highlight some of that. Everyone wins, everyone benefits. Well, awesome. Thank you, Jason. Thank you, everyone, for tuning in. Stay safe, stay positive, and we'll see you on the next live stream. Bye for now.